Welcome to Public Health America, a weekly program produced by BronxNet in partnership with Mercy College. I'm your host, Dr. William Latimer. Here on Public Health America, we speak with experts from an array of specialties across the liberal arts and health professions to provide you with not only the best science, but practical tips to live a healthier life. We also celebrate what studies have long documented, namely the unparalleled value of a liberal arts college education by setting the stage to pursue a career of your choice, increase lifetime earnings, and engage in civil debate. Our experts will share decisions they made and support they received that helped them to beat the odds. By sharing one or two life lessons, their stories may provide you with the inspiration and method to realize your dreams. This is Public Health America. Welcome to Public Health America. I'm your host, Dr. William Latimer. It is my pleasure to have with us today Dr. Carrie Albright, Professor of Health and Exercise Science at the greatest private Catholic college in Pennsylvania, Chestnut Hill College. Carrie, welcome to the program.
Well, thanks for having me, Bill.
Pleasure. So I know you've been doing some cutting edge work on wearable devices, particularly those that foster health promotion. Tell us a little bit about your work.
Wearable devices have been around for a long time. They were originated to help with research to see, looking at measuring physical activity and how well it worked from a health perspective, but they've recently been used from a motivational standpoint. So a lot of my research had to do with, are these wearable devices actually getting people more active, and are they working in the long term? Can we keep people active just with these devices, things like pedometers and the watches?
So you just anticipated my next question. So pedometers and watches, go into a little bit more detail of what wearable devices we're talking about and precisely what they do.
Yeah, and they've gotten fancy over the years. So we started with just pedometers that what you would wear on your waist belt, and they would count steps. And right now we're at the point that we can pre-program in the walk you want to take, and your watch will tell you step by step exactly all the turns you should take through the middle of Philadelphia in order to get your 3 miles in. Most people are using them to watch things like how many calories am I going through, what distance have I gone, how many steps am I accumulating. So it's an accountability watch, and also keeping track of the activities levels, especially if someone is really big into numbers, from a calorie number or a distance number.
So when you say it measures calories, literally the watch can, I know this is a naive question, I'll ask it anyway, the watch can monitor calorie intake?
Calorie expenditure. So
calorie, okay, based on activity, based on movement.
Based on the acceleration of your movement, the amount of time spent in movement, yes.
Got it. So if you were wearing a watch like that and you went for a run on a treadmill, or you were cleaning the house, would all that stuff get recorded too?
All of that, the newest watches, yes. So they used to be only good for outside. When we could use the GPS, and now most of them you can use inside. You can use on stationary devices such as a treadmill too. They've gotten much better from a technology. Yeah.
Got it. I know that this might seem slightly far afield, but in a number of our programs on a wide array of topics, some of the guests have talked about how there is poorer access to underserved and or low-income communities in urban and or rural settings. Might that be the case with these wearable devices? And might that be important, particularly if, I certainly know in some urban settings, I'm not an expert nationally, that things like rates of obesity or diabetes or other kinds of relatively serious health problems are common, and these sorts of devices might help.
I think it's a huge limitation in us trying to fight the obesity epidemic. These watches are expensive, right? Most of the activity counters that are going to give you the best information from an accountability standpoint and from you actually keeping track of your activity. Most of them are probably going to start somewhere around $100 and they go up to thousands of dollars. We have them figured out for special populations. So for example, I've done some research on like talking devices that we would give to visually impaired. So we're looking at different special populations, but the cost of them is still probably putting them out of reach for our more marginalized populations from a socioeconomic standpoint.
Sure. I mean, one wonders in the short or the long term, the extent, I mean, is there work afoot? I mean, this presents just a completely separate barrier, but are insurance companies being courted, or have they been courted about the possibility of picking up the cost as a preventative health measure?
I'm sure with some insurance programs, it can get looped in terms of you buying it and you eventually being reimbursed for it. But I think that those types of insurance programs are probably a little far and few between it right now, especially because of the cost. We have some lower cost devices, but people want things that interact with your phone nowadays, so that it links onto an app and you can challenge people. And so these low cost versions aren't very popular.
Got it. So tell us a little bit about the research behind, these watches that record health information, important health information, or any other device you want to tell us about, and how having said device improves health behavior. What do we know about that?
Yeah, I mean, I started doing some of this research in the early 2000s when some of the original companies like a Polar were putting out their first watches that tracked physical activity, wanted to look at calorie expenditure. And so we were trying to validate them. How well do they work overall? Or do they work for all activities? Do they work well with males and females? And some of our original research showed, they work really well with males, but they're not great at measuring for females because many of them are using a prediction equation. So we've done a lot of validation studies, but once we had validated instruments, we want to say, okay, now can we actually use them? Since they do a good job of measuring, can we actually use them to motivate people? So we've done some studies, again, in the early 2000s, early 2010s, where we would give these people these devices, sedentary individuals, and we'd see their activity jump way up just by having a device. The problem is that excitement tends to wane after a while.
And why do we have any understanding of why the gender difference between male, female?
Yeah, I think any of these devices are not directly measuring anything. They're still predicting and estimating. And that means that there's inside of your watch, there's an equation going on. And so the information that these companies put in for males to predict and females to predict was slightly off. And so they had to better their predicting for females.
Got it. So 10 years later, or however many years later, post-pandemic, have the corporations that make these watches caught up, and the male-female predictive algorithms are pretty equally effective, or are they still working on that?
No, I mean, they've caught up. The watches are better than ever in all the different things that they're measuring. Now, we know that we've got down calorie measuring. Again, there's still an estimate to the best that we can. And now they're moving on to measuring other things at this point. We're past the point of making sure these watches are good from an activity measurement standpoint.
So as a person that's incredibly far from being an expert on anything involving technology, including this, some of the things that come to mind are, because you made an interesting point that e.g. the watches don't measure anything directly, it's all about algorithm. What about things like, and I only know what I see on a commercial, which is infrequent at best, but I'm thinking about things like blood pressure, cholesterol, blood sugar. Do the devices you're talking about, I mean, like, is anyone working on an all-encompassing device that can measure, 14 key parameters for people that might have specific issues, or generally healthy people that just want to keep their health under control, or is that still far away?
Oh no, we've got a lot of big corporations, Apple, Google, they're all in the race for measuring these things. So we have watches that, we started with things such as simple as heart rate. Now they want to measure EKG. They want to be able to measure blood glucose levels. things like blood pressure. These are going to have to directly measure in some type of fashion, though, but they're not going to be the perfect. So, we want to measure EKG. We need to measure electrical activity of the heart, but yet you're going to be trying to do it from a watch. So we're going to have it's not necessarily a prediction equation anymore, but it may not be the best measurement area on the body to be taking,
Right.
but it can raise a lot of red flags if need be.
Interesting. Yeah. Fascinating work. I mean, now I'm wondering, is there any work underway about innovative devices that are not necessarily on one's wrist that would take a better measurement? But before we move on to that, with the time we have left, so you are professor of health and exercise science at Chestnut Hill College in Chestnut Hill, outside of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. Tell us a little bit about how this excellent research and work translates into your pedagogy, your teaching in the programs at Chestnut Hill College.
Yeah, I mean, being at a small school, it's all about being with the students most of my time. And so most of my research, all of my research at this point, is done with the students. So whether it's their projects that they're developing and I'm helping them learn how to develop projects and go through research methodology, or I come up with the initial idea and they are helping me move through the process of collecting data. So Chestnut Hill is great from the standpoint that it's really hands-on and the students get their hands in everything we do. And so they have their hands in all the research that I'd be doing.
That's great. And I know that, I'm guessing, but certainly in the last 10 or 15 years, I think exercise science as a field has really taken off and grown. Tell us a little bit about the jobs that exercise science graduates tend to gravitate to and get.
Yeah. Exercise science really bloomed in the early 2000s in a lot of educational programs. Just, as the health of the United States started to decline, we need more people coming out in the exercise science fields. They're coming out and they're working as exercise physiologists, or, they're dealing with individuals that have health conditions that we need to know how can we help cure these health conditions or treat these health conditions using exercise, whether they've just had a heart attack or they have diabetes. We have a lot of them are going out and working in therapy. So your cardiac rehab type of therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy. But then we also have the sports side of things. I'm more in the health, but we have the sports side of things, like the strength conditioning, the personal training aspect of our fields.
That's great. So it sounds like there's a pretty wide array of professions, of jobs out there for graduates in exercise science. Just with about a minute left in this part, the first half of our segment, if you were to give guidance to high school students thinking about a career in exercise science and getting into college, what recommendations would you give them?
Yeah, it's always in a developing field. If you have an interest in science and you like exercise, this is a great area to go. And then what I tell them next is, as you're trying, there are a lot of different directions from jobs that you could go. I always think about what population do you want to work with? Do you see yourself working with a population that has disease or is unhealthy? Do you see yourself working with an athlete? And then from there, we can branch off and start to look a little bit more specifically at jobs that you may be interested in.
That's great. Great advice. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Dr. Carrie Albright will tell us a little bit about her own journey as an undergraduate student and professionally generally that led to her ability to have this great career. This is Public Health America. I'm your host, Dr. William Latimer. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Public Health America. I'm your host, Dr. William Latimer. So, Carrie, we always start the second half of the segment with the exact same question, which is tell us where you were born and about some of your formative experiences.
Yeah, definitely. So I was born in New Jersey, right outside of Philadelphia. So Philadelphia kind of is my hometown. In terms of informative experiences, so my family, my parents did not go right from high school to college. They started a family first. So I think one of the thing that was most informative to me was I watched my mother go to college. I went to my mother's college graduation. And so I saw the importance of, even when you have a family and you have a job, how important education is by watching her move through this. And even as, she had the full-time job and she still kept going on to further in college. And I think that was really important to see that, to make sure that I knew how important education was.
That's great. That's a great story. About how old were you when your mom graduated from college?
So I think I was probably maybe 8th grade or the beginning of high school when she graduated from college. So the time where it was very impactful at that point in my life.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, my mom went to grad school in my presence, but and she was a teacher, a public school teacher forever. But there's no question that had an impact that I think might be similar, and it is very powerful and positive. So you're getting through high school. What was your process in thinking about whether or not you would, and then ultimately at what point did you attend undergrad?
Yeah, so I think, I'm watching my mom go through college, and she was going for a science degree. So I'd watch her bring home specimens from biology lab and talk about those things. And so my interest in science grew from there. And she was working at a hospital at the time, so she would bring me to the hospital and have me talk to individuals that were working there. I've been to Fox Chase Cancer Center. I've been to Jeff Hospital. And that really kind of pushed me in that trajectory from a science perspective and to go into that direction.
Great. And then what was the selection process like, and where did you ultimately attend college?
Yeah, I mean, like any high schooler going to selection process, it's hard to figure out where to choose to go. And I'll be honest, a lot of it was money, right? Many of us have to choose college based on what the costs are going to be, and many of us are limited by the costs. So I ended up applying to, primarily a bunch of state schools. And ultimately, I ended up going to James Madison University down in Virginia, which is where my sister had gone.
Got it. And what was your major? So I actually went to college where my older sister was attending at the time. I was a freshman when she was a junior. And I've always known, I pretty much knew it then, that her presence was such a huge factor in my decision. How much was that a factor in your decision?
Yeah, I think it's huge. I mean, going down and visiting her and her being able to take us on tours and letting us see what the campus was like. And then I did the same thing. My brother followed me. We all ended up going to the same school. And we just going to a school, I think also that had a variety of options. As an 18-year-old, I don't know exactly what I want to do with the rest of my life. And so I wanted to go to a school that had a variety of options for me, knowing that I was potentially going to change my mind.
Right. I think that is such an important point. I think every era has its own challenge. So I think it's unwise to be overly critical of one's own era or less than critical of an earlier one. But certainly, in my view, having been in higher ed for 30 plus years, there's a huge push in recent years to know exactly what you're going to do for the rest of your life when you're 18, which seems unrealistic. It's fine if an 18-year-old or a 20-year-old or a 22-year-old or a 24-year-old does know that, and then it works out. That's fantastic. But I also think that undergraduate years can be a time of exploration, where one goes on that journey and wears a few hats. So tell us about your journey at James Madison. What was your thinking going in? What did you ultimately major in?
Yeah, so I ended up majoring in exercise science. At that point, there weren't as many exercise science programs in colleges, and I knew that they had a well-established program. So I knew going in that was going to be my major. And they had a very family-like atmosphere. So the advisors and the faculty that were there kind of took you under your wing and move me through my journey at that point, right? My parents weren't located near me. Neither of them had gone through that same type of journey as I was. And so just finding faculty that work at the college to kind of help me figure out career path and how to get there. They were great at that.
And what was, so talk a little bit about your work in your undergraduate major. Talk about, so in institutions that have professional programs, like nursing, exercise science, PA, PT, OT, there's sometimes a little bit of a divide, which I think is doesn't make a lot of sense, between liberal arts, humanities, and professional programs. Was there any kind of a divide? How did your first 2 years, which probably was more general education, traditional, how did that inform and probably, I would anticipate, improve the impact of your exercise science training that came thereafter? Probably. What was that linkage like?
Yeah, I think understanding that I'm going in as an 18-year-old, a 20-year-old that's very interested in my field. And I think it takes over time realizing that, my interest is in science, but understanding the impact that psychology will have on my job, understanding the impact that sociology will have on my job. It takes a little while to learn that. And it takes time of getting out there, getting into your internship, doing those clinical sites for you to understand that this is not just about science and how much you really have to pay attention in those humanities classes and your behavioral sciences classes, because they're going to be an equally as important part of your job.
Well said, and I think that's a really important message, particularly to traditional age students that want to go into health professions. And the notion that you pointed out, that it's not an overnight realization of how those linkages become meaningful, and it could even be post-graduation that it becomes clearer how those relationships between humanities, liberal arts, and professional studies can intertwine in very positive ways. So during your undergraduate experience, tell us, what were the one or two things from an academic standpoint that made it positive, that that you took away from, that set you up for success thereafter?
Yeah, I think one of the big things, and I tell my students this, one of the things that's going to set you up for success is when people offer for you to see something or experience something, always say yes. And so whenever, a faculty member would say, hey, do you want to come down and try working in the research lab? You say yes. Do you want to come and observe with us at the cardiac rehab? You say yes. Because equally as important, there was things just as important. There were things I found out that I don't want to do at all, right? I went to a physical therapy clinic because they had me go. And I found out this is not for me. I checked it off the list. And so I think getting out there and experiencing things is very, very important in terms of determining the direction you want to go.
Right. And we've had a number of guests that have articulated that, which I agree is so important, meaning that experiential learning opportunities, broadly defined, are critically important, and knowing what you don't want to do is every bit as important, maybe even more so than knowing what you do want to do. So let's move on from undergrad. What was your next step, either professionally or in terms of your education?
Yeah, I think by the end of undergrad, I was fortunate enough to have a faculty that took me under their wing in terms of being part of their research team and being able to work in their lab and their fitness facility with their research. And that curiosity of asking questions and finding out answers. So I knew that I was probably going to have to move on to grad school. And so from there, it was talking to faculty and saying, if this is my interest, where should I go to grad school? And just having the mentors that kind of pushed me through my different levels of graduate school as I started to narrow in on my interests. So from undergrad, I knew I had a general interest in exercise physiology. And so I was pushed towards, I ended up at University of Maryland, College Park, where they're a pretty high level research institution.
That's great. University of Maryland, College Park is absolutely fabulous. So what was your degree, and what was your general experience like as you progressed? I mean, did you get a doctorate in exercise science, or what was your next step?
Yeah, I think the progression is interesting. So I went for exercise physiology, and I knew I was interested in the health side of things. And so my master's degree was at University of Maryland, and they have very large projects going on, $5 million projects. And so you're kind of a worker within it, and you get to learn the process. I chose my doctoral level. I ended up going to University of Tennessee, and at that point, they're a big research institution, but I knew I would have the opportunity to develop my own projects, and work through the process with myself or maybe one other two people, which would help me in terms of becoming an independent researcher. That was a big jump for me going from Maryland to Tennessee.
Got it. Got it. And looking back, and this is sort of an oblique turn on a question I've already asked you. Obviously you made it through. You've gotten into academia. You've got a vibrant research career. Pedagogy or teaching is a huge part of what you do. What about your undergraduate experience set you up for success in your master's and doctoral programs? Like what did you learn there, and this is part two, what happened at the doctoral level and or master's that was critical in setting you up for success professionally thereafter?
Yeah, I think number one was going to a college that my undergraduate that was big on general education. Right, I was able to take a lot, whether it was your liberal arts, and have a lot of room to take courses that weren't necessarily in that major, but that worked together with it. And I think that really helped me set myself up for success, especially as I'm moving through programs that are very applied. A lot of people are going to end up going and working out in the clinical field, and you need to be prepared for those soft skills. And even as I did that, as I worked through going through my college years, I worked as an exercise physiologist, and even putting on research and working with the general population. Most of my research was with sedentary unhealthy women, and being able to work with them. Again, it's that soft skill component. It's not just the science component.
Great. And with just a moment or two left, again, if you were to give advice to our viewers today about whether or not to attend college, undergraduate, and how to get there, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, for most of us, that was the transformational experience in our lives. It's where we are educated on everything, not just the career that we are in, but how to move through life, how to be a critical thinker, how to make decisions, how to make the best choices for ourselves, and how to go about doing that. So I think we need to think of it not just about our career trajectory, but again, how we're just going to live the rest of our lives.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I want to thank Dr. Carrie Albright, Professor of Health and Exercise Science at Chestnut Hill College in Chestnut Hill, Pennsylvania, right outside of Philadelphia. I want to thank our viewers for tuning in. I'm your host, Dr. William Latimer. This is Public Health America. Take care. See you next time.